What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Wrestling with Freddie. Today, we have a special guest because he's a fan of wrestling just like me. He may have zero in-ring experience. However, he's known across the world. In Mexico, they call him El Nariz. In Colombia, they call him, well, they also call him El Nariz. And everywhere else, he's known as the Great Helwani.
Now, stepping up to the mic, the host of Wrestling with Freddie, Freddie Prinze Jr.
Ladies and gentlemen, a good friend of the show, Mr. Ariel Helwani. How are you, sir?
Oh, I'm doing so well. It is such an honor to be here. I would argue that I'm the biggest fan of this program. My routine is every Wednesday morning as I drive to do my show, the MMA Hour, I listen to you. And I love Storytime with Freddie. I mean, you are one of the all-time great storytellers. The interviews are great. AJ Lee's great, all this stuff. But to hear you tell these stories with the passion and the detail and the exuberance of something that happened 11 years ago, you're telling it to us like it happened yesterday. It's amazing. I love everything about it. I can't get enough. I'm sad when it ends, so it's a huge honor for me to be here.
You've encouraged me a lot through this process. I told you about this project before I told anyone outside my wife. And you've been so good to me throughout this, and I appreciate your advice and just you saying yes and coming to talk today. I always have fun when I go and do your show. I wish I was like a regular guest that came in and did like your bets or something, but I don't know anything about gambling, so that wouldn't work out well. But I'm glad to have you on because you love professional wrestling. And I learned this by watching your show and seeing you and the great Daniel Cormier go in on one of the great ones. Oh no, The Rock's the great one, but one of the also great ones, Booker T. And you guys didn't back down at all. You were good on the mic. You were like, it had these old school manager 80s vibes where I was just like, oh my, this is like, he's in the Crockett territory right now. When did you fall in love with wrestling?
Well, first of all, what a great compliment. Before it's all said and done, before this journey called life is done, I would love just one time, just let me be that old school heel manager. I would love to do it. And I think Daniel Cormier would be a perfect guy because of his chops as the All-American, the Olympian, all that stuff. So I've grown up admiring those guys in particular, Bobby the Brain, the Slickster, Mr. Fuji, Paul Heyman, MVP now. Love those guys. I remember, my earliest days just as a human being involved wrestling. Like I remember vividly being at Avenue Video in Montreal in the TMR shopping center. None of your listeners, except for the ones that grew up in Montreal, will know what I'm talking about. And there was the WrestleMania 1 box with Mr. T and Hulk Hogan. And I remember renting it. And I was 4 years old. It was probably 86 that I rented it. It happened in 85, of course, but I was 4 in 86. And I remember telling my parents I wanted to rent this. And then I had a massive box of LJN toys, the old school ones, right? Like the rubber ones, massive box. And I would record cards. Like I would put the camcorder next to the ring and I would like lay out all the guys and I would do a whole card. I would let it run for like 2 hours and I would do all the matches. I would sit there with my legs crossed and do all the matches. And so, 86, like my first memories of being a fan of anything is me being a pro wrestling fan. I'll never forget first grade, my birthday. They're having a house show at the Montreal Forum on a Friday night, and everyone in school was talking about it. Everyone was saying they're going, and I wasn't going, and I was so bummed. I remember my friend wore a Hercules t-shirt to school, and I remember being so jealous that I wasn't going. And I remember that Friday night playing soccer with my brothers in the basement, and I remember seeing, so it was a basement, we had like some windows at the top, and I remember seeing some like legs walking by, and I was like, wait a second, I think that's and I'm in the first grade, I think that's my friend's shoes up there. So I run upstairs and all my friends are waiting for me in our kitchen. My parents got us all tickets to the Montreal Forum to go to the house show, my first event live. And I'll never forget, my favorite guy was Bret the Hitman Hart, and he went up against Mr. Perfect, and they went the distance. And Bret was dead tired. He rolled over Mr. Perfect, and it went 1-2, and the bell went off and they went to the time limit. And so it ended up being a draw. Like I remember this in my brain when I was a kid and I would get shot. Sorry for going long, but I get passionate when I talk about this. My mom said to me, think of something you love to make you not think of the shot. And my choice was Bret Hart winning the world championship before he ever won it for the first time. That's what I would pick to make me feel happy and forget about the shot. So these are my early memories of being a wrestling fan and why I think so fondly of it.
So what you said in the very beginning of the podcast, where you said you just like to sit back and listen because it feels like yesterday, that's literally what you just did. And it always brings me back to the magic of professional wrestling. And we're of an age pre-Montreal Screwjob, which I want to get into with you, because you had the pleasure or the displeasure, depending on how you look at it, of actually being there. But when I was a kid, it was magical. It was real. I've never had a bad memory from a professional wrestling show ever. And so even when I worked there, and even on days that were awful days, like I still remember sneaking away like into the side halls where like guys would do run-ins and stuff, and I just watched the matches for free, basically, because as a kid we couldn't really, even though it was the most affordable ticket. My dad earned money for a year, and I promise we didn't get any of it. So we grew up with nothing, man. My mom worked 2 jobs. So wrestling was sort of where I found my father figures, right? The guys I've always wanted to be big, man. I just want to be giant and buff just once. It just wasn't in the genetic pool for me. But I worshiped those guys. And then when I got to meet some of them and see their humanity and relate to them, it made it this will sound weird to everyone but you or other wrestling fans. It made the investment that I put in emotionally all worthwhile, because The Undertaker was awesome, because The Big Show was awesome, because Sergeant Slaughter was awesome, even though he turned his back on America. But it was a magical moment for me, and I didn't get to go see a show until post Montreal Screwjob. I'm wondering, I want now, if you could, this is the only thing you have that I'm jealous of, okay? I'm not jealous of your martial arts connections. I got martial arts connections too, baby. I'm not jealous of your Canadian connections. I got Canadian homies too. Shout out Keith Callum. But you got to go to the match of all matches, the most discussed match in the history of wrestling all around the world, regardless of what country you're from. You were at the Montreal Screwjob. Do you remember what the day was like?
Yo,
do you
I remember
Tell
so
me,
much.
what did you eat for breakfast? Like, what happened?
Okay, you know what's crazy about that story? So 80s, hardcore wrestling fan, hardcore. Around 94 now, I actually fall out of love with wrestling. And I fall in love with the NBA. I was a huge NBA fan. That was my big thing. So like I started to love like NBA, NFL. I was a big Knicks fan. They were having a great year. The Bills were my favorite football team. I was a huge Montreal Expos baseball fan. So like I really started to get involved in like the regular sports, right? So like that era of 93, 94, and it was kind of like an up and down era for, WWF at the time. They're trying to figure themselves out. Here comes, WCW, all that stuff. And so I'm actually at my driving lessons course, right? And side note about me, as you like to say, what do you like to say? What do you say when
side
you
quests? They're side quests.
Yes, yeah. Side quests. So I don't know how it is where you grew up in Quebec. You have to pass your permit and then pass your actual test as a driver. Failed the permit twice, got it on the 3rd time. Failed the test 4 times, got it on the 5th time. I had to go back 8 times total to get this damn license. Anyway, one of the times I'm sitting with my good friend Jason Tackefman, and we're in the cafeteria after I failed another test of my permit. And he's telling me that the Survivor Series is coming to Montreal in November. Now, no pay-per-view had ever come to Montreal. And I'm pretty sure at that point, there was maybe 1 or 2 in Canada, but never came to Montreal. And I grew up, the pay-per-views were never available live. Like I remember vividly trying to find WrestleMania 6 somewhere and not being able to find it live. Like I would always have to wait till the following Saturday afternoon, Maple Leaf Wrestling. Me and Gene would go through the results, and then I would have to wait a month till it came out Coliseum home video. So like the fact that a pay-per-view was coming to Montreal, even though I wasn't really following the product, was mind-blowing. And we said we had to go. So we bought tickets and we went. So he brings me up to speed. Now we're at this 97, I'm 15. The internet is just starting, right? And so we're somewhat aware of what's going on, but we're not so aware. And I'll never forget. I remember where I went to dinner the night before, actually, a restaurant called Weinstein and Gavino's in downtown Montreal. Like, I remember everything about that weekend. And I remember going, and the first thing that hit me were all the signs in the crowd. Because again, I hadn't really been watching the product. So it was the era of like all the neon signs. And I'm like, what the hell is this? Like, this wasn't a thing 5 years ago. And I remember like a few things hit me. The oddities. I was like, whoa, these dudes came out with like a Cartman doll and stuff. That's freaking weird. I remember Sable. I'll be honest. I'm 15 years old, and like this woman comes out in the leather outfit, and you're like, holy shit, this is not the wrestling that I grew up in the 80s. Like, it was like mind blowing for a teenager. And so I remember Sunny. I remember all these things. I remember Kane. And then I remember the main event. And now, so Bret Hart was my favorite, like my first favorite athlete, right? I loved this guy. He was everything that I wanted to be. He's Canadian superhero, the coolest glasses, the pink. I love pink till this day, the hair, everything. And so I know Shawn Michaels, of course. I hated Shawn Michaels. And so the people around us were telling us what was going on. And there were rumors that this was going to be the last match. And then, of course, it ends. Now, when you're high up like I was, you're not really quite sure. Like, did he tap? Did he not tap? Like, I can't pretend like I knew exactly what Earl Hebner did. But I sure as hell stayed till the very end. And I remember vividly him trashing everything, trashing the monitors, trashing the announce table. And then I remember him doing WCW with his hands, with his finger. And I was like, what the hell? This is nuts. And so like, this is like a Sunday night, and I'm in high school and stuff. I go home, and I'll never forget going into my basement and being like, open, the world of internet wrestling just hit me. Scoopswrestling.com and Raja WWF, and reading everything. And that ignited, and then I became a bigger fan than I ever was. And I remember Brett Screwed Bread and all this stuff. And so it was funny, like it was my reintroduction, and it was also what got me to fall in love once again with pro wrestling and get so far into it, more so than I was as a kid.
Okay, so that's going to lead me to my next thing, because it's a section of wrestling that you and I disagree on. But for those who are listening I hear this a lot on social media, they're like, I don't know anything about wrestling. I just like hearing these stories. What Ariel just shared with you is so significant in the wrestling business, because every single thing about it changed. Until this moment, people within the industry did not comment on the fact that it was choreographed and the results were predetermined. It just wasn't discussed. People outside the business did. And all of a sudden, a promoter is going to lose his top wrestler to his competitor. So it's like the Lakers losing Shaq to the Celtics. Brett hated this man so much that he refused to do it. So the owner of the company, Vince McMahon, makes a choice that in a submission hold, he's just going to tell the ref, say that Bret Hart tapped and get me my title back. And they actually friggin' did this. And every wrestling fan on earth has obsessed over this. Every person in the business have done like 4-hour like deep dives on this. And you're getting to hear it from someone who was actually there. And you said this moment is what brought you back, and you fell in love with what was known and still is known as the Attitude Era of wrestling. Am I right?
That is, I mean, like at that point, now I was all in. By the way, I don't know if you've ever seen the documentary Wrestling with Shadows, but
Yes.
It's about that story and the build. I mean, the access that those guys got. I've seen that documentary maybe 15 times. I love maybe that and Beyond the Mat, probably my two favorite wrestling documentaries. So if there's any non-wrestling fans listening to this, I highly suggest those. And yes, so at that point, like I'm all in. In Canada at the time, in Montreal, we didn't even get Raw live. Raw would come on sometimes at 11, sometimes at 12, sometimes at 1 a.m. So it was really tough in those days to be a fan. And you guys were really lucky that you would get things live. You would get Nitro live. Like we didn't get that stuff live. Only like late 90s did it start to become, a thing where it would actually be live for us as well. My family got a satellite dish, so it became easier. When I was in college, I was so lonely and I was so homesick and I had horrendous social anxiety, to the point where like when I was living in a dorm, my first year, I would wait till like 2, 3 a.m. until I heard no one in the hallways just to go brush my teeth so I wouldn't have to interact with anyone. I would eat almonds for dinner because I didn't want to go to the cafeteria and have dinner around any kids. My only friend was pro wrestling. I watched everything. I would even order the $9.99 Wednesday night TNA pay-per-views. If you remember that, every Wednesday they would do the TNA. I would watch that. I
No one
know, I
ordered
did.
those.
TNA, SmackDown, Raw. I was watching old WCW. I was going back into the archives, finding it. Like, that was my only friend. In fact, I had a persuasive speech final. My persuasive speech was, I am going to persuade you to order WWF Judgment Day this Sunday, because it was the first time that both belts were going to be on the line. Chris Jericho ends up becoming the undisputed champion. That was my project. And I got an A for it. That's how hardcore I was about wrestling at that time. So it was great. Like, that era was amazing, and it's a thing that I hold near and dear to my heart.
Oh, I want to back up for a sec. Why do you think you got so? This was college. Why do you think you got so lonely? Did loneliness lead you to wrestling, or were there not wrestling fans there? Wrestling led to the loneliness. What
I'm sure there were fans that I could have bonded with, that I could have watched things with. I am very, very close to my parents, and I'm very close to my mom. And I wanted to go live this dream of going to I'm very goal oriented, and I believe, like, you only get one life, and I don't want to be 85 and regret that, I didn't go for it. And I was taken by the magic of TV, and like getting beamed into someone's home and people sitting around and watching you, and you're, Howard Cosell, right? Like, I grew up idolizing these people. So I wanted to go, and I knew I had to go, but it would break my heart seeing her cry when I would leave. It would break my heart missing, like, my friends in the community that I grew up in Montreal. No one goes away to college. Like, it's not a part of the culture. All my friends stayed home, lived at home, went and partied together. Like, I missed everything. And so I just felt really, really out of place. And I felt like I was, like, sacrificing the personal life for the professional dream. And it was crippling. I mean, I went to see a therapist. That didn't work out. It was really, really, it was the worst 3 years of my life. If I didn't do it, I don't know if I end up where I am now. So I'm glad that I did it. But I mean, this was like, get the F out time. This was like WrestleMania 20. Like, wrestling was the one friend. I mean, I had stacks of tapes. It was all I did, all I watched, all I thought about. It was the only thing that got my mind off of how depressed I was.
It's crazy, the emotional sacrifice that has to be made on a daily basis to pursue what people call a crazy dream, right? Like, to accomplish something that big requires an amount of selfishness. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean you have to focus on self. The goal-oriented people, I think, understand this, and it's usually the people I click with the most. And oddly enough, every one of our guests have kind of broken this down similarly to the way you have. But I remember when I was a young actor and booking movies, and they didn't shoot anything in Hollywood anymore because of tax breaks in other states and countries and things like that. And I had to leave everything that made me comfortable. My godfather was Bob Wall, who we just lost last week. He passed away.
I apologize.
Oh no, he was a wonderful man and introduced me to so many other father figures that I had in my life. But he was the most predominant one for certain. But I remember having to leave him and his wife and my two god sisters for my first movie. And it was a small nothing part, bro. I had like 3 little scenes, but it was a Michelle Pfeiffer movie. So I was excited, and I was there like 6 weeks. I only worked like 4 days, and every other day was just loneliness. There was no cell phone. There was no anything back then. It was just loneliness. And I remember just wanting to come home. I wasn't getting to train martial arts. There were no martial arts academies on Nantucket. They dyed my hair this crazy blonde color, so none of like the local hoity-toity shops would like serve me food. They were like, "Get out of here!" I'm like, "What are you talking about? I don't want to look like this. I'm an actor in a movie. Get out of here, punk!" I'm like, "Oh my god!" Like, I hated it. I bought a kite. I think I was like 19. I bought a kite and just went to the beach. And
oh my god!
flying a kite, dude! I was like, "Yo, what is my life right now?" But that sadness, I think, is necessary to accomplish big dreams. It's not. There's nothing scary about not leaving, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if you have a dream and it's a big one, it's gonna be scary. You're gonna be afraid, and putting yourself in an uncomfortable situation is the best way for you to grow and develop the emotional skills and the skills necessary for the dream itself, and then have them come true. And I've watched your career forever, man. Like Bob Wall was the first investor in UFC 1.
Wow.
He didn't make any of the billions, right? It was just a one-time little deal, and they all took a bath on it. But like, I've watched you from the beginning of your career, from the first time I saw you talk MMA and whatever year it was, dude, you were so young. You looked like just a punk kid, man. I just wanted to punch you in the face. And I did, dude. And
what, you didn't like me?
You just were like, you were just young.
And
I was like, man, he's like stirring it up, man. And I was just, you know what I mean? And I was so old school from Bob Wall and all those guys. You know what I mean? So it was just like, who is this guy? And then I just watched you like grow and grow. And I saw how much you actually cared about the fighters, even though you had a job to do. And I found you to be, and maybe it's just the sport that allows you more room to kind of circumnavigate back and forth, where you can protect the fighters, do your job, because it's very hard to protect an ego and to be a journalist at the same time, right? Like it's just difficult. I've seen it from the other end where I'm like, they didn't mean to be disrespectful, but God, that question is brutal, and I just don't want to have to answer that. So it's tough, and I've seen you be able to do that from a kid who was at the Montreal screw job to the highest of highs in the industry. Like, you've done the corporate thing, you've done the build your own empire thing. Now you're in the happiness phase. Like, it's just crazy to see. And I would like to say that it's all because of Bret Hart.
I won't say just Bret Hart, but it's all because of pro wrestling. I am not an MMA fan if it's not for pro wrestling. MMA, anyone who argues against the fact that MMA was born out of pro wrestling, MMA's roots are firmly entrenched in the world of pro wrestling, you are kidding yourself. There is no MMA without pro wrestling. I mean, just even going back to Antonio Inoki and Muhammad Ali in the 70s. Like,
that was a crazy fight.
Yes, but it was like the pro wrestler guy, and who knows what was real, what wasn't. But the point is, like, this sport, the best of MMA is when it borrows from pro wrestling. Like, the guys who are the biggest stars are the characters, are the guys who are larger than life, the entrances, all that stuff is all from pro wrestling. And then you have guys now like Israel Adesanya, who's like, I grew up in the Attitude Era, and like The Rock and Booker T, and he's freaking out because Booker's in the press conference. Like, and look at him. Look at the showman that he is. Look at the star that he has become because he understands how to sell and how to promote and all this stuff. So yes, it's funny because post-graduation, I went down the route of TV production, and it led me to actually becoming good friends with Kurt Angle because I was working for Spike TV, and I got to write like a little mini, like a short film for Kurt when he moved over to TNA, and we really developed a great relationship. And in fact, one of the things he told me early on was that I reminded him of Brian Gewirtz because of the Syracuse connection. Because he just said that to me, and I was like, I'll take that as a compliment.
I've mentioned Brian on this podcast. Of course you have,
yes. And I've asked you about Brian a little bit, but we became.
He wanted to punch me in the face the way I wanted to punch you in the face.
I get it. Kurt was the one who told me about the Chris Benoit tragedy. He told me before it got out. Like, that's how close we were. That he found out. He texted me about it, and the Benoit thing actually soured me on wrestling. Yeah. And I would check in, check out, check in, check out. But really, now what got me back really into it, and it's been the greatest joy, is pandemic hits. There's nothing going on. There's that WrestleMania that you were, the one at the Performance Center
where Drew goes over.
Yeah, and the match between the Fiend and Cena was just cinematic art, in my opinion. It was amazing.
They took a big chance with that,
I
man.
loved it.
I don't know if every part of that match worked for everyone, and I'd heard a lot of people criticizing it, but I never slammed people for trying to
I
take
loved
a
it.
chance and doing something different. I liked a lot of that parts of that. I liked the AJ
Yeah, it
Styles
was fun.
Taker cinematic match as well. Like, I like when people take chances. It's funny you mentioned the Benoit thing. You know, I've never talked about it on this podcast, but that Kurt Angle Chris Benoit match in Boston is my favorite match of all time. And it was weird when it's not weird. When the Benoit thing happened, I felt, and still to this day, even with all the information I have about what actually happened with Benoit now, I still feel awkward sometimes saying that that's my favorite match ever. I'll still say it. You know what I mean? But I'd never seen two wrestlers make me think it was real the whole time since I was a little kid until I saw that match. And I was just like, they didn't stop moving for 25 minutes. Like it was the scene. And they tried the match again in LA. And Shaq came in the middle of the match and it kind of like sucked the energy from it. So it wasn't the same, but it was like my favorite match. And Kurt Angle, that's what brought me back to wrestling, because I did not like the Attitude Era.
Okay.
The matches, I think, are some of the best matches that have ever happened. But the storylines, I was always, maybe I'm a little bit older than you, I just didn't click with them. I will say this. Russo's Attitude Era earned more money than probably every other promoter's era combined. Right. So I'm certainly in the minority and wrong on this. But the storyline that I always loved was the milk truck, beer truck storyline. And I was so team milk truck. Like when they drove that in, and critics of wrestling will say what I'm about to say is ridiculous. I thought that was the most creative response ever to the entire Stone Cold persona. Drinking beer, screwing up guys' promos on purpose with the wood, and like knowing that it was going to wreck guys. And then here comes, and I hated that. Like I hated that Stone Cold would do that. And here comes Kurt Angle. And even though he was just there to save himself and integrity and all the eyes, right? To me, he was there to save wrestling from that. And when he sprayed him with the milk truck, I literally stood up and was like, oh my God, I love wrestling again. And from that moment, I was like, okay, I'm back. You guys got me again. And I've been team milk truck ever since.
It was so great. I mean, Kurt, what a great performer. And like, I thought it was brilliant that they brought him in at, you would think babyface, right? Olympic gold medalist, America. The fact that they brought him in as a heel was brilliant. Actually, one of my great memories is No Mercy 2000, Albany, New York. My friends and I drove from Montreal to Albany to go watch Angle versus Rock when Angle became champion for the first time. That was the Rikishi, hit and run with Austin Angle, and we loved Angle. Angle was our guy, and we burnt a CD with just his theme song on it, and we just played it over and over again as we were leaving the arena. We were so excited. Bro,
I still do that with the damn Shinsuke Nakamura theme song. Well. I just put it on repeat.
It's the best. But I was just gonna say, like at the pandemic. I sat with my boys who are now 10 and 8, and I showed them WrestleMania, and then we started watching like the network and stuff, and they became hardcore fans. And
who are their favorites?
So my older son, Oliver, loves Goldberg. And I know that might piss off some fans now. And my middle son,
really?
He loves Goldberg. It might be the Jewish thing, He's just, I don't know, but he loves Goldberg.
He's a real pull for MJF, man. MJF.
I'll tell you something about that in a second. And the middle son loves Roman Reigns. So actually, just this morning, we didn't watch Elimination Chamber. Just this morning, we finally got to see Goldberg versus Roman Reigns after 2 years of debating who's better. And the middle son won. I didn't want to break, the older son's heart. That's like, there's no chance this dude is winning. But like, he thought for a second. They are very, I am not, just I want to make this clear. They are very loyal to the WWE brand. They are very anti-AEW. They are like loyal. I think it's
kids pick sides so easily.
And I really like AEW. I like it. I mean, like that feels like the adult stuff, right?
AEW's killing it right now.
I love MJF. As a fellow Jew, I love
the MJF promo that he just cut about the kid from Long Island. So I watched this promo, and for those who don't know, go watch it on YouTube. And it's MJF talking about how CM Punk was his inspiration and his betrayer all at the same time. And the guy's crying during the promo. And all the people that boo him, and they were even booing him at the beginning of the promo, start like checking their feelings. And you can see it in the crowd. Like he's got them wrapped up. And he talks about this hero, and CM Punk comes out. And he's like, is that true? And with no microphone, MJF's just like giving him the nod, like, you know it's true. And he just like walks out because it was all based on this one word, Friday. Because Punk said, oh, it's just another Friday when you met me. And he shows a picture of MJF as a little boy meeting CM Punk as hero. And then the next week, MJF's promo is just about the one word, Friday. Yeah, it was just another day for you, but here's what it was for me. And he's talking about anti-Semitism and kids throwing quarters at him and just the most disgusting stuff to where everybody in there is genuinely feeling sorry for this guy.
I would argue he's the best heel in the business right now. Like he is legit. When he talked about Pillman, right? Like no one does that.
Oh my God. People got genuinely mad, and then he leaned in on them.
Yes. Oh my God. He is so good. I really love their product. I mean, I'm a fan of wrestling, and so I believe, and I talk about this in MMA, like I want more options for the boys in the back, as they say. So I like when there's competition. In fact, I say the competition makes the dominant brand work a little harder and be a little more creative and pull out all the stops. So I think AEW's emergence is better for WWE, and hopefully, Bellator's emergence is better for the UFC and all that stuff. Like I think a rising tide really does lift all boats. My kids are very anti. Like when I tell them, this dude, like Bryan Danielson goes to AEW, they're like, he's dead to us. We're done with him.
No way.
He betrayed them. Now, I think
Bro, that's how my grandma in Puerto Rico did the Rock.
That's cool.
She stopped talking to my wife because he turned his back on the people.
That's a great story. That's a great story.
Your kids did it
too.
Did it too. That means wrestling's got
Oh, it's great. Here's the thing. Nick Khan used to be my agent, and he's been very nice, when he went to WWE.
That's random.
Yeah, he was my agent, crazy enough, and now he's the president of WWE. So he's been very nice to them, and he sent. He knows that they're fans, so he sent them birthday presents and stuff. And so I think, and I actually respect it. They're like, all right, now we're WWE guys. Like,
your kids are so mafioso.
He sent them, which he obviously didn't type, but there's like a note like, hey, dear Walter, enjoy your presents from your friends at the WWE, and it's like on a little like WWE thing with a letterhead. It's been now 2 years, and it's like it's taped above his bed, and it's like that's from. I was going to say the president.
He keeps that longer than the toys. Yeah, he'll keep that forever.
Yeah. So I think that's why they're big loyalists, which I think is cool. So the point is now as a dad, and I know you can relate to this, to watch this with them as kids, like to go through Royal Rumble and all this stuff, and to watch it with them. Has just been such a freaking joy. Like it has made me even a bigger fan just to be able to, and now they have the toys and all that stuff. So it's great, man. It brings me back to when I was a little boy.
We're gonna close out on that because that's a really just sort of great way to look at it. I was talking to Charlotte the other day, and you're French Canadian, so you'll appreciate this word. And she was loving it, and she heard that Cesaro was leaving WWE, and she felt kind of bad. And I said, don't. I said, this is a literal and figurative renaissance, a rebirth of the wrestling industry. You're seeing new school guys bring it back to the old school ways, like MJF. You're seeing guys on the opposite end of the spectrum, like Xavier Woods, literally living his gimmick and somehow getting it over. And with all this new business and all these changes that are happening at the big dog, it's a literal rebirth. And all these little indie brands are going to come up. And I'll tell you something when we stop recording that'll cue you into how much closer I am to what we talked about on your show with my Fed. But you guys don't get to hear that until later. So I appreciate you guys tuning in. I appreciate you for coming and doing the show, Ariel. And I love you too, man. So everybody, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week on Wrestling with Freddie. This has been a production of iHeart's My Cultura podcast network. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.